Space for civic and political life. Angelina is our operations manager. She's amazing. We are somehow going to record this thing tonight for the live environment. We're going to do it. It's going to happen. Our iPad ran out of juice, so we got it. We got a tripod. As you know, at Mannys, we do events, but we also want to create community. Community is important. So what we're going to ask everyone to do while I pee is to meet someone next to you that you don't already know, introduce yourself, and if you had to build 80,000 homes in San Francisco, where would you put them? That's the question I want you to ask each other. Like, where would you spread them out? How would you, do that? Okay? So take a minute so I can go use the restroom and answer that question. Bye. I don't think you can do
Is AI going to take your job or kill you? What? Is AI going to take your job or kill you? What do you do, can I ask?
It might eventually, but...
You're a what?
It might do both eventually, but...
Oh, yeah.
We're endangered eventually.
Yeah. What do you know about it? Do you follow this stuff? It sounds pretty fascinating. Sounds like it's going to be smarter than us. Well, it's already smarter than me.
Where you're putting the 82,000 units.
Where we put what?
Where are you going to put the 82,000 units? Wait, that's too close.
You don't have to put them anywhere. You just got to have a plan of where to put them. Am I right? You just got to have a plan of where to put them.
Yeah. What is this for?
That's all you got to know. It's for my blog. I got 12 readers. You're one. Actually, I only have 6. He and I click on twice a day. You read my blog, right?
You know where you're going to put them?
He says he doesn't read my blog either.
Where are you going to learn tonight?
No, all you gotta have is a legal plan, right? You got a legal plan?
We have a legal plan, yes.
Well, then what the hell are we doing here? You're trying to explain it to the public, right?
Right, we're going to explain it to the public.
This is Ritualists. He's the director of planning. He's the least known important person in town. This guy he's a cool customer. I met him when he was doing Mabel Tang's, was it Mabel Tang? It was her campaign, Hellman's old girlfriend. And Hellman was the treasurer of the campaign, and Hillis was the consultant. And Tony Hall beat him by 43 votes. And because Hellman had all the money, they did a recount, and Tony beat her by 44 the next time. But that goes back 25, 30 years.
Okay, I'm gonna squeeze this cord, right between this, go like this,
This is a housing crowd. We're talking about the housing element tonight. The main thing we're looking at is how do you squeeze 82,000 units in within, I think we got 7 years, 8 years, 10 years, doesn't matter, but 82,000 units is a lot of units. I was pointing out to Hillis, I talk to people who know a lot more than me, and I'm stupid, so I don't let them talk enough, but all they have to have is a legal housing plan. They don't have to have 82,000 units. However, if they do not make an effort at it, if they give them, some of the cities were saying we're going to develop in cemeteries and creek ravines and crap like that, they were just faking it out. The state actually has requirements. In fact, they've usurped local authorities on planning codes. Scott Winger's done it almost all by himself, but the state now essentially controls local planning, particularly in big cities like here in Orange County. Here we go.
I would love to take a second and hear some of your answers. I want to know, and don't you, leaders of the planning world in San Francisco, want to know where the people would put all these houses? So, did I turn the music? I did. Who had an interesting answer to the question? That one they want to share? Do you want to? Yeah, you.
Well, I think mine's interesting.
What was your answer? Yeah, where would you put the 80,000 houses?
Well, I don't know about 80,000, but I can tell you there's all these cute pockets of neighborhoods out in the west side, Sunset and Richmond, with streets that sort of had some businesses kind of popping up, but you put some multifamily housing around there, more cute businesses are going to start to pop up, and more scenes, and then more people can start to walk their kids to school.
Love. Okay. Yes?
I also want to self-nominate.
Are you gonna build the houses?
No, I just want to own this comment. I would like to see less golf courses.
Less golf courses. I just was in Golden Gate Park at Beta Breakers. Anyone else run Beta Breakers? Yay! And there's a golf course in Golden Gate Park. Did you know that? I did not. In Golden Gate Park, there is a golf course.
Three par.
What's 3 par mean?
Just golf and
Small.
9 holes.
I've done 0 pars in my life, so I don't know. Yes, sir, where would you build the homes?
Well, we have an office vacancy rate between, I think, 20 to 30%, and I don't think they're coming back. I think we're kind of leveling out at 50% return rate to the office. So there's a lot of high-rise buildings and office buildings. I know conversion is really expensive and difficult, but maybe we should figure it out, at least for portions of it.
Awesome.
Reactivate downtown too.
Office buildings, vacant storefronts on this side of the room. Any ideas that haven't maybe been mentioned? Eric, what did you say?
I used to live in New York City, and all of the units there have been subdivided. So what is like a 1-bedroom in San Francisco would be a 2-bedroom in New York.
Wait a second, even smaller than our apartments? How?
It's better. But
Their apartments are smaller than ours. I believe it when I see it. Okay. How about, Angelina, how are we doing? How about one more? Yeah. Okay. One more idea of where would you build, if you had to build a ton of housing, where would you put it in the city? Yes.
cover up the parking lots.
Like, how many of them? Oh. This crowd has opinions, I see. And we need to improve community. Okay, I agree with that. Though I have nothing to do with that, obviously. Welcome everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it. This was a conversation about the housing element in particular. I know that you are the president of the Planning Commission. You are the mayor's advisor on planning, is that right?
Housing and land use.
Housing and land use, and you run the planning department. Okay. My first question is, how does this work? Like, as it relates to the housing element, what was each of your role in making this happen?
Maybe I'll start. I think we're kind of in the middle of the Planning Commission. So we are the body, there's 7 of us, each with 1 vote, and we are responsible for giving staff feedback, making changes, any amendments. Ultimately, we are voting to recommend that the Board of Supervisors either adopt or, adopt the housing element into our city's general plan. And then the board gets an up or down vote on it, and then the mayor gets to sign it. So maybe that's the overall kind of legislative process in the planning.
And when did you vote on it? You voted on it already.
It was in December of 2022, right?
And was it a 7-0 or how did it go?
One commissioner had to recuse herself, so it was a 6-0 vote and unanimously supporting it. And the Board of Supervisors also unanimously supported the housing element.
Okay, and then maybe, if you don't mind, maybe introduce yourself to folks and what specifically like your role to the mayor, what you advise her on, and what was your role in the housing element?
Sure. I'm Lisa Blestein. I work in the mayor's office in her policy team on housing and land use specifically. And as you can imagine, a huge part of the mayor's housing agenda is the housing element. And so she's very interested in making sure that that document was robust, that it was getting through both the Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors, and that it really sets the plan for the city's housing agenda over the next 8 years. So part of my role was making sure at a high level that that document really aligned with the mayor's broader housing agenda, that it provided clear guidance for the city for how it was going to execute on housing over the next 8 years, and that it got through kind of the politicized process of getting through the approvals. Obviously, the housing element is planning's document, but planning being accountable to the mayor's office, it's really the mayor who is signing that document, who is representing that document publicly, who is talking about it day in, day out when she's out in the community. So she had a huge role in the housing element process, albeit at a higher level than some of the planning staff who worked on it, over the past 3 years, all the way through approval, and continue to work on it.
Awesome. Director, what did you do?
Not a lot.
What was your role in all this?
So we, as the planning department, we are kind of charged with preparing the document and kind of the keepers of the general plan. The housing element is part of our general plan, and it's state mandated that we do it every 8 years. So you know, we were out talking to community groups, talking to advocates, getting input like we just did today, and I like all the ideas that we heard. I think I agree with all of them. Many of them are in the housing element, probably not the golf course one, because golfers get angry when you start trying to take away their golf courses, but, you know, this is what we did. It kind of got ideas to formulate the housing element, and then ultimately kind of bring that to the commission and the mayor and the board.
I mean, this might be a controversial opinion, but I feel like there's a lot of space on golf courses. Like, isn't one enough? Like, how many golf courses? Is that controversial?
They're all in public parks. They're all in.
It's easy to
Not
private. A transit
Some of them are private,
Yeah.
right?
Okay.
I think part of it would be thinking about the trade-off between like where, I mean, I don't know our city's golf courses very well, so I probably shouldn't opine, but part of it is thinking about maybe in the very traditional real estate thing, like what's the highest and best use of different parcels of land, and whether a golf course should become housing or not, okay, maybe it could be some other type of open space. Are there other places like parking lots, other candidates that are not being their highest and best use, could become something else that might have a little bit more buy-in, a little easier road. And you know, golf courses at least have open space, so they can provide that.
I mean, the golf course lobby is gonna come for me really hard, I'm sure. But you know what, let's go, I'm ready. So, why is it called the housing element?
Good.
And can you please explain what is actually this thing? Because I did go through it, and it is not what you might think it is, like a map that just says like where all the houses are gonna get built. That it is not. It is much more than that. So why is it called the housing element, and what is it? Director, maybe, Lisa?
I can take it first crack. So, you know, again, we have every jurisdiction has a general plan. We have a general plan. It's made up of various elements, right? There's a transportation element, there's a housing element, there's an open space element. And I think the difference with the housing element is the state mandates that we update the housing element every 8 years. And I think if you read our housing element, the housing element that we did before this one, it's a little bit everything to everybody, right? We should build more housing in the city, but we should preserve neighborhood character, and we should preserve, you know, whatever kind of sense. It didn't really set us on a good course or policy direction. But the state has said, you know, in housing elements, and before I think they did rubber stamp them, that we've got to say specifically on our housing element how we're going to get to our RENA goals, which is the 82,000 units of housing that we need to produce, and they want us to be specific. Like talk about what process changes you're going to make, talk about where you're going to rezone, et cetera, et cetera. So this housing element, I think different than most in the past, gets very specific on what we need to do to build those 82,000 units of housing, 45,000 of which have to be affordable.
Yeah, I think at a high level, you know, all general plan elements are the long-range planning documents for cities. So whether it's transportation, arts and culture, commerce, et cetera. And so this plan is our, you know, maybe not super long range because it's 8 years. So, but a mid-range plan for how we want to grow as a city and accommodate more residents and more folks in the city. So that's kind of, it's a guiding document. And I think to Rich's point, sometimes they can be a little bit more kind of like everything in the kitchen sink, and now we've got more specificity, more metrics, more measurable, and the state actually has you report every year on your progress on your housing element, not only just on the numbers of housing units built, but on the more qualitative programs as well that we propose. So there's a little bit more impetus to really mean what we say, because we're gonna have to say either we did it, we're in progress, or like, hey, we said we were gonna do this thing, but we didn't actually do it. So there's quite a lot more accountability in this housing element.
And I would also add that, kind of by way of background, this is the first housing element cycle where the housing element has had this gravity of state enforcement behind it. Previously, as Rich and Rachel mentioned, it was kind of this big high-level planning document. It's called the housing element because it's an element of the general plan, as Rich mentioned. And the general plan is kind of a constitution for the city's development. It's kind of like the general plan is the constitution, and then ordinances and zoning is like falls under that constitution or the general plan. But what the state has done is gone into the housing element process and mandated very specific things because of the housing crisis. And this was legislation that Senator Wiener passed when he was a senator. I think it was 2017 that he passed this legislation. And so what we're seeing this cycle is kind of untested. This is why you're hearing so much about the housing element right now, is like there's all this force that the state has put behind this process, and cities are kind of scrambling to figure it out because we haven't gone through this before, and I think it's great. It's really good for us to have this pressure from the state at the local level, especially in places like San Francisco where change has been challenging, and in other jurisdictions across the state where governments are perhaps a little more anti-housing. It's good for the state to place that scrutiny on this process and really ensure that cities are delivering on the goals that they're setting out in their housing element.
Okay, so yeah, I was gonna ask like why it seemed like this planning moment was a lot more, and people were talking about it a lot more. There was a lot more attention to it, and it's because this is the first time that the state can intervene if they don't build the housing that they need to, right? So what is the teeth here? Like, what is the enforcement mechanism? Is it like, okay, San Francisco said it's gonna build this amount of housing in this many years, and is it like after 8 years it like looks back and is it like you didn't do it and now we're taking your like presents away or whatever, your toys, and then we do it? Like, what exactly would happen?
Maybe I'll just say a few things and then Lisa can maybe add some more specificity. I'll say one of the other reasons that this was a very talked about housing element is we tripled our allocation. So Rich mentioned the RHNA, Regional Housing Needs Allocation, which is essentially our regional government through the state's formula has to determine how much housing does each, I think we have 106 jurisdictions in the Bay Area region need to build to meet the region's allocation. And so they go through a very complex and long formulating process and divide up the growth basically to every jurisdiction in the region, and ours tripled, right? So we have 82,000, I think we had like 30-some thousand or something. I mean, so just the order of magnitude that we're talking about of housing from the last cycle to this cycle tripled. So that's a really big deal, and it's quite a tall order, which gives us a lot of pressure to deliver. And then to your question, like what happens if we don't deliver? I think some of it is untested. Southern California is a little bit ahead of us, so we'll probably be watching some of their reporting because they start their cycle earlier than we do, and so it'll be interesting to see. But the state's office has an enforcement arm of the HCD, the Housing and Community Development Department, has an enforcement arm now, and so they can take actions. There's also been laws that allow folks to sue, whether they're third parties. The Attorney General could sue under certain circumstances. And even for getting the element passed and adopted by a deadline, we could have lost out on housing or transportation funds that come from the state to the city. And if we are found to be out of compliance with our element, i.e. we're not doing what we said we're going to do, then those penalties could also be reinstated. Lisa, I don't know if you have any more specifics on what the punishments could be, or we don't really know yet.
Yeah, so two things. One, the housing element the RHNA numbers, the 82,000 units that Rachel mentioned, that's not a production requirement. The HCD is not obligating the state to produce that many units or obligating the city to produce that many units because the city doesn't construct housing, that's private developers. But what it does require us to do is to accommodate that many units in our general plan and to pass ordinances that would allow for that many units to be built. So it's a combination of the city working with private developers or nonprofit developers to get that built.
Can I pause you there? So currently, is that not the case? Like, if developers wanted to build 80,000 units of housing in San Francisco today, are there sufficient restrictions that basically make it impossible or hard for them to do that?
Ding, 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 yes.
Okay. What are those, like, what does that look like?
So
is it the whole like West Side all single family home thing?
Yes.
Yeah.
So the city, while the city through Mo and through grants does build housing in that way, it's not our general business, right? But we are the regulators of land use, so we tell you what you can and can't do under private property.
But couldn't the planning department just say like, okay, now you can build just like what you can build on the east side, you can build on the west side? Like, couldn't you just with a stroke of a pen?
You can't just do it, but.
No, but what would the process for that look like?
Well, you're gonna change the zoning, so the board's gotta approve a change to our zoning, and the mayor's gotta sign it. Not a huge task, I mean, you gotta do CEQA, right? So you've got a undertaken environmental review. But, the zoning was put in place in the 60s and 70s to stop a lot of the development,
Okay, but just process, like six votes of the board and one pen stroke mayor.
I know I worked for the city for 20 years. We've been talking about rezoning Geary for those same 20 years, and we're probably talking about it for 10 years before that, right? So it's good to, we were talking about ADUs before that, so people talk about it, but ultimately doing it, getting kind of supervisors to buy into it, getting the mayor to sign it, is not an easy task.
And what does the housing element, how does the housing element get us closer to that 30-year journey ending?
Yeah, because it specifically lays out, this is what we're gonna do in the states, like Rachel and Lisa said, have kind of levers they can pull if we don't do it.
Yeah, so specifically what we're undertaking is an effort to look at the west side. If you look at the housing element, if you wanna like just cheat sheet through it and control F and find some stuff, there are 3 maps that do zoning scenarios, and they're just kind of hypothetical scenarios that get us to the capacity, right? So to your question is really like, do we have the capacity to build 82,000 homes in San Francisco? And we did the math, we crunched the numbers, we had to do a bunch of analyses, and we said, no, we don't. I think we're 36,000 units short, give or take a few. So we're 36,000 units short under today's current zoning, and I think if you look at our housing pipeline. So then we have to do the math again, make the maps, okay, where could we put it if we're gonna focus in well-resourced neighborhoods? And there's 3 scenarios that are there. And that's when we've gotta go and road test and talk to people, talk to supervisors, talk to citizens, talk to residents, get more input. And the mayor's put out a 1-year timeline for us to come back with a rezoning plan in January 2024, is that, or spring 2020, sometime
In January.
around January 2024 to say, here's our plan.
And is that to choose one of these 3 and be like, this is the one that is gonna work, or?
My guess it'd be a combination of the 3, you know, I don't think either of them is just like, oh, this is the way to do it. I think that's what we do wanna hear, and what I'm really interested to hear from folks is like the nuance of neighborhoods, like where could housing, to your point around the commercial districts, like what commercial districts could really be elevated with it? You know, do we wanna put people maybe near more parks or other amenities so that they're close to the things that they need for their daily life?
Yeah, I think this is kind of the crux of it, and so it's okay if you don't know the answer to this, but could you explain to the public, like, what are those 3 scenarios, and kind of what would they involve?
I feel like I'm making a quiz. I remember one of them.
Sorry, yeah, I actually have no
I think
idea.
one of them
so
is
I'm
like,
just
you
wondering.
know, kind of like lots of density, lots of lower density everywhere, kind of you're spreading it out across the bread, if the west side is some bread, and we're spreading it out evenly, okay?
So that's like single family homes to like, you could build 1 more unit on top.
It's probably more than 1 more unit, but it's a little bit more kind of spread around.
Okay.
The other one I think is transit and like high capacity corridor concentrated. I don't remember what the 3rd one is.
And I think the 3rd one goes beyond those corridors, like, you know, a couple blocks off the corridors.
Yeah, it's kind of
It's like a hybrid of the 2.
Yeah.
Okay. And is it all resting on the west side, or could San Francisco build, like, kind of clear the way for 36,000 extra units and still leave the west side untouched? Like, could you just do lots more skyscrapers in Pack Heights and, I don't know, this part of town and Soma, like, yeah.
Theoretically, you could, but is that good policy?
No.
No.
Exactly, yeah, and I would say a couple things. We've already done it, right? We've already paved the way through our decades of specific plans. So, you know, the Central Soma plan, the Eastern Neighborhoods plans, those plans essentially already did that. Checkbox done. And then you look at all the development on the waterfront, you've got power station, you've got so many things. You look at Dog Patch, Minute Neighborhood, you look at Mission Bay. So if you look over the last few decades, we've already built up on this side of the city. And so I think we're just having the rest of the city take its fair share of participation, you know, in the growth and change of the city.
Okay, 2 more questions. One is about whether or not, so were all these calcs done, all these calcs were done before the pandemic, right? 2019 was when the arena.
Some before and some during.
So, okay, do you think like, is there gonna be like a revision of how much housing we need to build because of the outflow from the city post-pandemic?
It's a great topic. There's not gonna be technically a revision. I don't anticipate that the state would do that. There was a lot of discussion when RHNA was being calculated of cities saying like, why are we getting this when people are working from home now? The commute patterns have totally changed. We don't know what the future is gonna hold. How do we know where the growth should be redistributed? And just that we have too much growth calculated. California shrinking, skies falling, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Again, I think this being a long-range plan, like I think people want to live in California. We're all here. I think people love living here, and I think
That's
we're
just
going to
because
grow
people
it.
want to be at Mannys.
So I think it's wise to grow, and there's a theory that remains to be seen. But I have hope in that if we build more capacity for housing, hopefully rents can at least be stable, if not drop, and we can have more people who come here and stay here and live here in San Francisco and in this region.
And it kind of seems like, didn't we traditionally like underbuild for a very long time? So not the biggest issue if we like build too much housing for a bit, right?
And the other thing is, again, this is for us to allow that housing to be built. It's not to say the housing is 100% going to be built within those 8 years, but we have to do our job as a city to make sure that we're creating the conditions so that if people want to live here, they can, and developers can build the housing.
Yeah, so my second question was to you. We recently had a conversation, and I don't remember which one it was, but you talked about how there's like 50,000 units entitled, or something like that.
60,000.
60,000 units are entitled, meaning they could start building, now, but they have no construction has begun, and that's because of a variety of things that has nothing to do with your department or the housing element. It sounds like, but it's construction costs, it's rules and regulations within the city of who to hire to build housing and how much it costs to build housing, and maybe the political process, they don't want to deal with stuff. So like, is there anything in the housing element that touches getting units from being entitled to actually getting built?
Yeah, I mean, this was a big issue with the state in HCD when they approved our housing elements. They didn't want us to count too many, because we could have said, all right, we've got 60,000 units that are in the pipeline, we're only gonna zone for a few more, and we're kind of done. And they said, no, like you've gotta kind of tell us in good faith how many of those units are actually gonna get built in the next 8 years, and what you're gonna do to get them built. So, I mean, the mayor has introduced a couple things to already get those things started. One is to look at these large DA projects, Potrero Power.
These large
DA's
which?
development agreements.
DA development agreement.
Okay, so these are like Balboa Reservoir.
Balboa Reservoir. In a lot of those projects, we are asking them to build more than the required affordable housing, build infrastructure, build parks, but with no kind of city help to do that. So the mayor's put forward a plan that they can ask for basically tax increment, their property tax kind of rebated back to them to help with infrastructure costs. And this was kind of the theory behind redevelopment, and a lot of what other cities do is to pay for that infrastructure through the investment of the kind of future tax growth. So that's a proposal we've put forward. The city, Mayor Breed and Supervisor Peskin and what's called the Technical Advisory Committee, the TAC, are looking at fees and affordable inclusionary rates to see if they're a barrier to build new housing, and they're recommending a reduction in those. So there are things we are doing currently to get some of, if not all of those 60,000 units that are in the pipeline built.
But just to be clear, what I heard was some future tax rebates and potentially reducing fees, both of those subject to like board supervisorial approval.
Yeah, but those are huge, and the board is supporting them.
Got it.
Supervisor Walton was with the mayor on one, Supervisor Peskin has been.
Okay.
And I think that's an important point you made, which is the housing element, to Lisa's analogy, if it's the Constitution, does not in and of itself do that much, right? It just sets forward, here are the policies and actions, and here's our objectives, here's the policies, here's the actions we're going to take. And then, myself and our other commissioners, we're working with Rich and through the mayor to say like, okay, planning department, do this. But the mayor, through her purview, is saying, okay, Mo, do this. MOHD, the Mayor's Office of Housing and Community Development, or if it's the Office of Economic Workforce Development. So it is the planning department's kind of work to create it and to support it, but it touches other city agencies that then have the kind of marching orders to implement it, and still has to go through our political process. So not many things in there can just happen because they're in the housing element.
Did you want to say something, Lisa?
Yeah, I mean, I think the other thing that I would add, so there's the legislation that Rich just mentioned that will help with unsticking the pipeline. The other thing that the mayor's office is working on is looking at our departments and the inefficiencies that are within city government, and asking the departments that are responsible for housing permitting or housing delivery. So the port, the Department of Building Inspection, the planning department, although planning is not the worst offender.
Really good.
So these departments that touch the development approval process, especially on the building side of things. So once it's gotten through the planning approval process, they still have to get all these other permits for street improvement, for, their, site permits, exactly. All of that stuff takes a lot of time and adds cost to projects. And so one of the things that we're trying to do is to cut down on those timelines, and the mayor has put out an executive directive asking the departments to look at their processes, kind of do a self-audit, and then propose measures that will reduce those timelines by 50%, which is a tall order, but we need drastic change within the departments to reduce these construction costs, because that's preventing a lot of these pipeline projects from moving forward. Yeah.
Okay, I just have 2 more questions, and we'll get to audience questions. The first is, it seems like this is a crowd that seems to like really want lots of housing to get built, and maybe not the most pro golf course in the world. But like, imagine like, flip the script. Imagine the 4 of us are sitting in a room, and everyone in the room is a single family homeowner on the west side. And we're sitting here, we're talking about the housing element, you're trying to explain to them, you know, why it's important that we completely change what their neighborhood looks like in order to build all this housing. What would you say would their greatest opposition be? Like, what are they actually nervous about? And what is the planning department or city leadership, how are you planning on selling this vision of a future San Francisco to them?
And as far as fear, I think what folks are most afraid about.
Wait, I'm sorry, this is where I grab my popcorn.
I think what most folks are afraid about is the thing that they love the most changing and becoming worse, right? They love their home, they love their neighborhood, they love their things. I think it comes from a place of wanting to protect something that is very precious to them and not being sure that the changes are going to yield the same experience that they've had. I think part of what I would hopefully try to persuade them is around just, you know, if they have family, if they have kids, do their kids live in the city? Can their kids afford to live here? Can their kids find a place to be here? And if not, how can this be part of that? That's where I think we really have to make sure this plan keeps and holds to its affordability and inclusionary goals. I mean, half of our allocation is below market rate housing. So I keep thinking, if we could build over 40,000 below market rate units in San Francisco, how transformative would that be for everyone who's in this room or who's in that room, in terms of their kids, their family, their grandkids being able to be here in the city and being able to experience the beautiful, wonderful neighborhood that they enjoy and love, just with more neighbors.
That sounds great. I wonder, tough question, a toughie. Like, that sounds great, but from what I feel like from a lot of the conversations that we've had on the stage, it sounds like if you want to build that much affordable housing, it just doesn't pan out financially in the city. And so I guess I wonder, like, is it realistic to expect a San Francisco of 2023 to meet our housing goals and build 40,000 units of affordable housing? Or was that something that we put in there, or the city put in there, in order for it not to be, like, opposed by folks?
Is part of our allocation from the state, so, and from our regional government. So the allocation comes with 82,000, and here's the income groups that need to be satisfied through that. So it's part of our state's laws and processes. So we had to do it. But I guess I would just only say, we can't do something we've never done before without doing things we've never done before. So we've never built that many housing units, nor that many affordable units, and we're gonna have to do things that we currently aren't doing to reach that goal.
And I would say that, you know, our intention as a city is to build that many units. That we would not like nothing more than to accomplish all of those goals. And that relies obviously on local funding, but it relies heavily on state funding. And so the state is putting these obligations on us, and we are also asking for the state's support in helping us meet those obligations. So that's part of this strategy is, you know, we're engaging with a lot of with the state on the advocacy around funding, so that we can really maximize affordable housing production. And you know, one of the things that we're also working on is convening like an affordable housing leadership group with folks in the affordable housing industry with a lot of expertise to think about how we can reduce costs for affordable housing, how we can make our money go further. Are there innovative funding strategies that we have not been using that we could deploy to produce more affordable housing in the city? And that's a huge part of the solution, you know, across the city, but also it impacts the west side. Ideally, you know, like Rachel was saying, we want more housing on the west side so that folks who are aging out of their single family homes can live in senior housing on the west side in their neighborhoods. Like, that is all part of this vision for San Francisco.
And I just want to bring it back to what Rich was talking about earlier, the pipeline. If you look at the amount of affordable housing in our pipeline, it's tens of thousands of units. So if we can unlock that pipeline through the infrastructure financing district and other, getting rid of government constraints, we can't do everything. We can't jumpstart the whole market, economy, but we can do things, and we have units that are entitled, waiting to be built. And just a story, not to make you depressed, but I think to illustrate the government constraints and other constraints we're trying to change, is Park Merced. Big redevelopment proposal proposed in the west side, been around for 10 plus years. What happened after they got approval? They had 4 years of sequel lawsuit, which again, state law is changing to hopefully help to make that a little less frequent. 4 years of sequel lawsuit. Then they had 3 years of mapping with Public Works to figure out the mapping of all the condo units and all the property lines and stuff, and that took longer than they thought. By that time, their financing had kind of basically expired and they needed to get new financing, and then the pandemic hit. So you can just see this perfect storm of things that are both, government constraints, non-government constraints, city at different levels, that led to this huge redevelopment on the west side, right, being held up. But they're interested in the financing district, they're interested in certain things, so we're hoping that they're getting some new financing and coming back to the table. So I just wanna say, there's a lot of naysaying about the housing element, basically oh, we're never gonna do it, and that's the exact attitude you do not need. Saying you're not gonna do something is the way to not do it, but if you think, okay, how do we do it, then I think we can get there.
And it's a waste of time and energy to say that we can't do it. We just need to move forward. Our focus at the city level is just we're gonna do everything we can to make sure it happens, and not think about what happens if it doesn't.
Thank you. That gets to my last question, and we'll get to audience questions, which is, it dovetails perfectly into this, which is you look into the housing element, there's a lot, especially in the kind of mission and objectives part, that has to do with broader social and economic inequities. There's a portion on reparations and housing as a form of reparations. There's a whole section on loans and on redlining and on the housing element as a way to address what someone who is a layperson would say where's housing? This is supposed to be a housing plan. What's all this other stuff about, economic, social inequality, racism, all this stuff. So talk to me about the intention behind that, the process, and how the department and the three of you see housing as a tool to address centuries of inequality.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's really groundbreaking is the way that our department has centered racial and social equity in the last few years and continues to make strides to do that. And I think the housing element and the reparations framework is part of that, really thinking about how do we think about land. We read the land acknowledgement every time we start our planning commission hearings. Again, thinking about land use, the place that we're in. This is a real place. It's not just theoretical, it's not just maps, right? This is where we live and move and have our whole experience. And so it's not just about where you live, what type of building, what type of home, the number of it can get very kind of inhuman, but it's about the people who make up our city and how do we have them here? How do we revive and restore and even bring back the African American community here? How do we lift up the Native American community here? And so that gives us to ideas of processing, how do we do things quicker? What can we do to help meet homeowners who are low income? All these ideas can come out, and we're looking forward to the Reparations Task Force completing its work so we can really link up the land use and housing ideas that they come up with ours in addition to what we've already had. I just think with a lot of energy goes into the rezoning because that's kind of the flashpoint. But to your point, there's so much in this element that isn't just about making new houses, it's about how do we use the housing and the land that we have for our people who are here.
Yeah, I will say that, we view housing as a means for providing access to opportunities across the city to all folks who live here, and especially those who have been denied access to housing, especially in certain neighborhoods of our city. So that's why the focus is on expanding affordable housing production in neighborhoods that have historically not seen affordable housing production over the past 20, 30 years, and providing opportunities for different people to live in neighborhoods, especially on the west side. And that is a huge part of our vision for bringing or infusing equity throughout all our housing policies, and that's really what the housing element embodies. And I agree with Rachel that the planning department did a wonderful job in framing it around racial and social equity, and that's something that is really deeply felt, and something also, by the way, that the state is expecting us to do. And aside from being the right thing to do, it's something the state is very interested in San Francisco doing, and in jurisdictions across the state also doing.
Yeah, just to piggyback on that, the state didn't just say build 82,000 units of housing, it said affirmatively further fair housing, AFFH, which was thrown around a lot during the housing element process, but it meant build housing in higher resourced communities, build affordable housing in well-resourced neighborhoods, things we couldn't do because the underlying zoning wouldn't even allow us to do it. And the mayor and Supervisor Melgar just introduced or said they're intending to introduce legislation in the next couple of weeks that actually removes density controls that we have in most of the west side, which even restricts further what you can build. So you have a height and bulk kind of envelope that you could build, but on top of that, we put in density controls in the 70s, which further restrict what you can build and really have a kind of negative effect on the ability to build affordable housing, because we need, kind of a scale that we need to get to build affordable housing. So the state pushed on this as well.
Thank you very much. Round of applause for our panelists. Couple things. One, it'd be great if you could direct your question to maybe one of the three, so we don't have three people answering every question. So we get to more of them. And that's it. We'll try to group them if we can. I tried to ask as many questions as I could right here with the bangle. Yes. Yes. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. This might be a question for Rich, but maybe all of you. What are you all doing to further the reduction of discretionary review and / by right development?
Okay, discretionary review and by right development. There was one right here. No, right behind there with the brown hair. Yeah.
So I don't know who to ask this to directly, but how do the other elements adapt to supporting, 80,000 new homes and however many people that bring?
Amazing. Okay, right here.
I'm a resident of one of the below market rate buildings. I have personally experienced the challenges associated with limited parking availability. It has proven to be not only costly and inconvenient, but it's also significantly contributed to our stress levels, especially in my building. I would greatly appreciate if you could kindly elaborate on your strategies addressing this issue and ensuring that future affordable housing projects incorporate sufficient parking provisions. By doing so, you would not only alleviate the burdensome parking situation, but also enhance the overall quality of our residents.
Awesome. So only one of you can answer one of these questions. The first is about discretionary review and by right, the other one is about how the other elements adapt, and the third is about parking availability around affordable housing.
I'll take the DR question. Okay. One, discretionary review, which we commonly refer to as DR, which anybody can protest any project and it ends up before the planning commission with Rachel and her colleagues. It's baked into our charter, at least that's what the city attorney says, that it's baked into our charter, which makes it problematic to get rid of. But on top of DR, there are all kinds of other requirements. Like we have height limits in some districts where you can build to 65 feet, but you need commission approval to go to 85 feet, or you need commission approval if your lot is a certain size. So again, I think through the housing element or implementing the housing element, the mayor has put forward legislation that gets rid of a lot of that. That basically tries to say, if the zoning allows for it, it shouldn't be discretionary. You should be able to approve that project administratively. Now, it may take, ultimately a charter change to get fully to that, but I think we're making steps to get there. And then the state is coming in too and saying, if you meet certain requirements, your ministerial approval, so it kind of overrides our charter and the discretionary review provisions. But I think ultimately to get fully to that, we'll need to amend the charter with a voter initiative. But we're trying to get there, and the housing element basically says that. If we zone for it and you meet the rules, stop, approve it administratively. We don't need hearing upon hearing to approve that project.
How are the other elements adapting? And am I the only one constantly thinking about the fifth element this entire time? Because I'm just, I'm the only one.
I feel like finish now. I think that's one of actually my biggest concerns for the housing element is just, it's housing focused, and notwithstanding the other kind of items that are in it that are kind of more social and equity minded, it's still focused around housing where people live and neighborhoods. And so we have work that we need to do around what are the other pieces of infrastructure, particularly public. So we talked about transit, parks, libraries, schools, which is a whole other government body, right, that manages public schools, fire stations, police stations. You can just think of all the things that you need when you have a complete neighborhood, and then including private spaces like retail spaces, workplaces, etc. So we do have quite a bit of work to do around community facilities, and I think some of that will be yielded from the rezoning in terms of where do we end up planning to put people, and then given that, where can different resources go. We also have opportunities with larger scale redevelopments like Stonestown or Park Merced or these places to try to co-locate community facilities that can serve maybe a broader area than maybe just one development at a time, right? Some of these facilities, we can't site them one development at a time, it's too it's too piecemeal. And looking at existing facilities that are community-based, could they be more vertical? Can we like add, library and a community center together? Like what can we do to enhance the facilities we have and make sure that they can serve more people and more residents?
Coffee shop / bookstore / civic event space. Lisa, do you want to take the parking thing?
Sure. I mean, I would say, and thank you for sharing that concern. I mean, I understand the challenge, and we want people to be able to move around the city freely, and we don't want it to cause stress. And part of the housing element strategy is to also dovetail, and this kind of answers the previous question, dovetail with the transportation element, which is currently also being updated. And so we want people to circulate around the city freely. We want to improve Muni service, understanding that might not take you everywhere that your car might take you, and you might still need a car for other reasons, and that's a very valid thing. And we're not trying to eliminate all parking in the city wholesale. We just want to make sure that we're providing options so that transit legitimately does serve people throughout the city, so that if you really do need a car, you can still use it. But hopefully if you're running errands around the city or you're trying to meet up with friends in the city, it's very easy to take Muni. And that's also part of the vision of the housing element and the transportation element.
All right, let's get another round of questions. Oh my God, a lot of people. Okay, usually it's so easy for me. Person in the black. Yes.
Just by way of reference, I work for the city of San Jose Citywide Planning Division and Long Ridge Manny. And I work on a central area plan for 7,000 units and 2,000 jobs. So we did kind of like a mini housing element for that specific plan. But the biggest challenge is not to accommodate the housing, but the actually to make the case that once you accommodate that, you have actually developers who can deliver on that. So the question is, what is your checkpoint with developers who can say, oh yeah, we're willing to commit that with the housing costs and the gap in the financing and all of this kind of stuff? Because that's our struggle. We happily to do that, but the community say, nobody can afford those projects anyways, even if you build 7,000 units. So I don't know if you can comment on that.
Awesome, let's move over here, person in the blonde. She's gonna hold Angelina with the blonde. Okay, and Angelina's gonna hold the mic.
I'm just wondering, what is this? Because most of us received it on the way in.
I don't know.
And we're wondering, is this related to this? Is this something different? Because it says.
Did you hand it out?
The city is encouraging developers to destroy rent-controlled housing, small businesses and displaced tenants. And that they're proposing to take away your voice.
Is it a protest flyer?
I don't know what it says. I was wondering what
Okay, that's fine. Who handed them out?
It's red.
They were outside.
Oh, they didn't go inside? Okay, well, maybe invite them in, whoever it is.
But what I can offer you is that planning is
other
doing.
flyers.
Another flyer. It's a protest flyer to the protest
The
flyer.
city is doing 2 open houses. The city is doing 2 open houses open to the public, and there's flyers available for you to register today if you're interested. These are on the back table.
Okay, I don't know what it's about. I didn't hand them out.
It's specific to the rezoning
If the person
efforts.
is here to hand it out, would love to have you explain it. They're not. Okay, person in the black jacket up here in front.
Oh, I'm really nervous.
Don't be nervous. You're good.
My question is, will you help me? I mean it. I don't have deep pockets. I'm nobody. My husband and I are currently proposing and failing to build 300 homes here in San Francisco. I mean, year 5, Ms. Gluckstein, you know me. You've taken my calls. You've become helpful in a meaningful way, so my question is not directed for you. We're failing. Wonderful people. The road to hell is paved in good intentions. But it's the hardest thing I've ever done, and we are failing. There's not an ED at the end yet, but we're failing. Code compliant, sweeping community support, queer boy from the city, not deep pockets. Most homes in San Francisco are built by billion-dollar corporations. What will you do to help me?
Okay, and just to be clear, the process is really complicated, expensive, taking too long.
Impossible.
Impossible. Really complex process. Question right here in the front, and what we're going to do to make it easier. Yes?
Hi, this is for Lisa. You talked about soliciting state support and city support needing to fund the below market rate or affordable housing units. I was wondering if you could elaborate on the ballot measure that's going to be in November 2024 to put a multi-billion-dollar housing bond, and what that would mean, even though you might not be able to express your personal opinion since that was an election thing, what that would mean for the city and getting those affordable housing units built.
All right, let's get these 3 questions. How to get developers to deliver on housing and actually build it, getting them to commit, how can we help make it easier to actually go through the process, and for Lisa, soliciting state support, the ballot measure to put, the ballot measure that, what was your name?
Lindsay.
Lindsay talked about. Why don't we start with you, Lisa, since it was directed to you?
Sure, yeah, what Lindsay was talking about is the BAFA bond, which stands for the Bay Area Housing Finance Authority. So it would be a new entity, it's a new entity that was created through state legislation that is going to put a $10 billion bond on the ballot across the 9 Bay Area counties. And that would be used to fund affordable housing across the Bay Area. It's a huge measure, it's a big deal, and it's very exciting. It means that San Francisco would get around $1.2 billion to spend on affordable housing over the next 10-ish years. To be clear, that's not a panacea. It won't solve our affordability crisis, but it would do a lot to help us make progress and to fund our pipeline of affordable housing projects that currently exist and allow us to build more beyond that pipeline. So it's a huge amount of funding. It's very exciting. It will, fingers crossed, be on the ballot in 2024, November 2024, but it's going to be a huge political lift, and because it spans the 9 Bay Area counties, it's going to rely on San Francisco to kind of pull its weight with the more affordable housing friendly voters here in San Francisco, because it needs to pass with at least a majority. There's also, this is a little bit technical, but bonds require a 2/3 majority currently, and there will be an accompanying measure that would reduce the bond threshold to 50 or 55%, so that it's easier for this affordable housing bond to pass. But those 2 things succeeding next fall during the elections will be huge for affordable housing, not only in San Francisco, we need it here, but across the region. And as you all know, other jurisdictions across the Bay Area building affordable housing also alleviates pressure here in San Francisco and is just the right thing to do. So we're really excited about it, and I encourage you all as potential voters to keep your eyes out for that and be supportive.
As far as the getting folks to build housing and actually put the shovels in the ground, I don't want to sugarcoat it. We're in the bad place in the market, right? And as Lisa said earlier, while we do build affordable housing as a city and nonprofit partners, like the private market provides most of the housing in this country. That is how we provide housing in the United States to most people. And so when the private market doesn't want to invest in housing because interest rates are high and construction costs are too high, there's only so much the city and government can do to get out of the way. We can make the timeline faster, which reduces costs. We can try to have infrastructure financing districts or other measures that help to provide resources. We can work more seamlessly together. We can get things done so that the city parts of it, the government constraints are reduced, and that does have a cost effect and reduce maybe fees or other things that add to the pro forma. But getting developers to put shovels in the ground requires on investments, and that requires people thinking that housing is a good return on their investment at this point in time. And I don't know that we're not there yet, and I think San Francisco's, we're gonna see what happens over the next few months, both our regional and our global economy. But housing is cyclical. So just because we're in a downturn now doesn't mean we'll always be here. Again, our nation is built on boom and bust cycles because of the way we do our national policy. And so we're in a bust right now, but we're gonna have another boom. And when that happens, folks will be putting shovels in the ground. So just hold on to the future.
You heard it here first, people. Rich, the last question.
So my ears perk up when I hear 300 units of housing, and you're proposing 300
And I want
units
to
of housing.
actually build them.
Yeah, so we welcome that. I think what works best, and I don't know if it complies with the zoning or what the holdup is.
100% code compliant,
Yeah.
year 5.
Then come talk to me.
I will.
When
When can I come?
Okay, well, honey, we're about to end this event, so how about that? We're gonna talk to you right after this. I know there's a lot more questions, but I'm hot. It's hot, and also I want to give you the opportunity to ask your questions directly of these folks. We have a little bit of time in between this event and the next event on housing that is happening here in 20 minutes. San Francisco YIMBY, it is happening at 7 though, right?
It's at, oh yeah, it is at.
Yeah, it's 7. At 7 o'clock, SFYB is doing an event, a panel on permanent supportive housing in the city. So make it a double feature. Go grab yourself a wine or a beer and come, or stay here if you want, because there's another event on housing that's happening at 7 o'clock. But in the meantime, if you want, you can ask your questions directly to these folks, so that's okay with you. Few things. One, there's a lot of amazing upcoming events here. Like, we have 4 events on Thursday. It's insane. 4 events in one night. I will say we just announced an event on the 31st. It's the 2nd installment of Mission Local Live. And Joe Eskenazi is going to be interviewing the executive director of the Young Women's Freedom Center and Latifah Simon on the Banco Brown shooting. Banco Brown was a member of the Young Women's Freedom Center, and also Latifah is going to give kind of a more 30,000-foot overview of what the shooting means in the context of all the other things that are happening in our city and our country. It's going to be a really, really important conversation. I hope you can join that one. We have a lot of politicians coming in June. We have Katie Porter, we have the mayor of Berkeley, we have Senator Padilla. All those, none of those have been announced yet, but they're all happening. So yeah, come to those, and then Jane Fonda is June 1st. It looks like it's sold out online, but join the waiting list. There are some tickets that I've held on the side just for this very moment. So that's gonna be really cool. There's gonna be drag queens and jazzercising and and alcohol. It's gonna be great.
Yay!
If you are not a sponsor of Mannys, it is my entreaty to you to become one. It is $36 a month or more. We've lost a lot of sponsors with the Doom Loop thing, and people leaving the city, and so we're losing them. We're having fewer and fewer sponsors, even though we're doing more and more events. And so I want you to help me reverse that trend. Become a sponsor of Manny's, allow us to do events like this, never turning anyone away for lack of funds, allowing people to come with whatever pay they can for a ticket price. And so the way we are able to do that is because of our sponsors program. You can cancel anytime, you get 50% off all of our tickets, and you can do it on welcometomannys.com. There was one more thing, you. Though technically you are paid as a planning commissioner, and I'm not, as an MTA board director of the board, I do want to just take a second and honor your public service as a member of the planning commission. It is so hard to serve on these boards and commissions. It is so hard to do it right and well with grace and with all the dedication that it takes. And so I just want to publicly honor you for serving the city in this capacity as president of this commission and putting in all that time and hours and listening to so many people provide their public comment. I know what it's like firsthand. And I just want to honor you for that service to the city. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you. It really is a joy. I'm a planning nerd, so I really love it. It doesn't feel that hard because I really do enjoy it. I'm glutton for punishment. So bring me the hard questions, the challenging public comment, just give me all of it.
Awesome. That is amazing. You're a hero. And then when people want to learn more about the housing element, they want to help make it all happen. How can the people in this room go from plan to what's another P? Plan to
Production.
To probably going to invite Manny over your home when it's built. No?
I think being involved in the open houses, being involved in the rezoning, that's going to be a big effort. Anytime you hear legislation coming out, if you want to write a letter to the planning commission, to the board of supervisors, to your supervisor, to the district that you are in, that is important. Let them know that you're there and what you support and what you want and that you vote.
Yeah, and just so you know, there are 2 key pieces of legislation. Rich has sort of referenced them, but there's one that will reduce process for housing approvals to make approvals faster and easier, which is huge. And that's coming up to the Planning Commission in early June 15th. June 15th. And then we'll go to the Board of Supervisors after that. So engage with your supervisor, let them know that you're interested, that you're supportive of those changes if you are. And then there's also another piece of legislation that will decontrol that will change density requirements along these major commercial corridors across the city and allow for more housing opportunities, especially on the west side. And that was just announced by the mayor. We don't have any dates yet, but it's likely that will go to the commission and the board sometime this summer. So stay tuned for more information on that and stay engaged.
Be a pro-housing voter, go to these open houses, support your commissioners, exit through the Valencia entrance if you're not staying for the next housing event, become a sponsor of Manny's. Sending love to all of you, goodbye. Woo! selfie or what?
George.
Rich, real quick, selfie.
Oh, I think you're on a wire.
Sorry, thank you.
No, that's okay. I just don't want you to get
George.
hurt.
George, turn this way. Thank you. Okay. George Davis. Long run.
Thank you.
Musk is way ahead of everybody. He says it's going to take a telescope to see second place when he finishes. He's got 4 million units on the road, 2 million next year, 3 million the next. He's going to have 10, and they're wired and they're collecting all the information. He is so far ahead of everybody. Have you seen his modular houses that he's building? And he's done 9,000 of those. He's got a tunnel under LA he's building, and yet the media is criticizing him. Why is that? What do you think of Elon Musk? You're a business reporter.
Well, he's definitely one of a kind, and I think he's...
That's deep.
Well, I mean, he has done
Come on, give your gut reaction. Nobody watches my stuff.
I think he's done some really cool stuff. Obviously, Tesla has made the richest man in the world. You can never count him out. He's crazy like a fox, and that's for better and for worse. So.
His automobile plant is so far ahead. Anyway, I'm curious, like your whole media scene and all, you just badmouth him because I really don't know anything about him. You know that he designed alloys for his his Mars rocket himself. The guy's chief engineer and everything, and yet the reporters were giving out the tail numbers of his plane, which this guy, the Israelis assassinate top scientists. You know that if they're in another country? This guy's the top scientist in the world, and yet your business is giving out the tail number of his plane. What do you think of that?
I don't know if they give out the tail number of his plane. I know there's a website that tracks the plane.
Which you give a link to.
Yeah, because it's public. I would say Elon Musk doesn't care what the media thinks.
It doesn't matter. We need him. I'm saying.
Yeah. Well, I think the media sometimes because he doesn't care what they think, they just go after him because they want him to care.
But what do you think of him personally? I mean, really.
I just said I think he.
You just said he's one of a kind. I mean, that's really deep. Come on.
I think he does some interesting things. I mean,
You apparently don't know what he does. What has he done? What has he done?
Tesla, Boring Company, PayPal,
he put NASA out of the launch business. Did you know that he's 10 times?
He's 10 times with NASA.
He is 10 times as successful as NASA with launches.
Okay. Well, the thing is, I know for a fact
that is one of a kind.
Can I finish?
Oh, I hope.
He is partnering with NASA to work on their launches. They have hired him. I don't think he's going to replace NASA because NASA's a federal institution and they've got regulations and legislation that probably Elon as a private company owner doesn't want to deal with. But they're working together. So I'm going to get a glass of wine so I can watch the next. We've got not that long. So.
Okay, thanks for talking to me.
You're welcome.
I'm out of here. We'll see what happens. Interesting business reporter. Does not like Elon Musk, and the tail number of his plane is public information, so it's okay to reprint it over and over and over. The guy is the most important scientist on the face of the earth. The Israelis would be giving him protection if he was Israeli. Americans are looking to get him killed by